All right, rendering value on a cone, not that much different than working with a cylinder. The only difference that we're looking at now is that we have the flat plane at the bottom, and then we have that top plane that now comes to a point. So it's a slightly different situation, but for the most part, if you can draw a cylinder, then you can handle a cone. The only difference now is that because it all comes to a point at the top, when we cast our rays, we just need to be aware of where our shadow falls. So I did this one where it was upside down, and I'm going to cast the shadow rays parallel, mostly because it will be easier. I mean, you could do a harder version, but since it was going to be easy, I was like, ooh, let's do that. Yeah. And then this again, once we know where our intersection is, then we know where our core shadow is, and it's the business of building transition. Also, you can do these relatively small. When you do them relatively small, you can get through them pretty quickly. It's only when your drawings are really large that it becomes a bit more challenging to build these transitions. But in these really small drawings, you can knock through this pretty quickly. I mean, wow, my table is rocking. It's like I'm pro wrestling. I'm not really drawing that hard. I'm not sure why it's rocking that much. And again, you don't want to apply an excessive amount of pressure on this, and you are trying to, as much as possible, again, discipline yourself to use your arm as much as possible, mostly because it gives you the ability to make really long marks really quickly and to build up transition. And when you're able to move your arm up and down to apply pressure or remove pressure, it often will lend to much more smoother transition and gradation. So at this point, rendering the value it's pretty quick, it's pretty efficient. There's not, I mean, it almost becomes effortless once you do enough of these. And I definitely recommend practicing these prior to drawing things. In addition, you can do simplified versions of things that you're drawing that seem or appear to be relatively complex. So in this case, because the shadow would actually be behind this object, but you can't really see behind it, what I'm going to do is just build the transitions of, hey, this is where my highlight is, and in this case, I am going to make something that's almost like a core shadow, but it's just because that area is turning form down towards the ground plane, and that once you turn form down to the ground plane, you still do get the reflected light that bounces. So I still want to make sure that I'm rendering that reflected light and giving that form so it doesn't flatten out. There are very few instances where your shadow will start at the ground and transition into an object. Anytime your object is up against something, you almost always get reflected light. So always plan for the potential of that there is a element, a part of your objects that you are rendering value on, that the light is bouncing from a floor, a ground, a wall, and bouncing back onto your object. Like, always make that consideration when you're rendering value. This is a unique situation where I did put a little bit of a dark shadow underneath it to effectively create the impression that there is something that's separating this from the ground plane. More than likely, there would probably be some ambient occlusion, meaning that's that really dark edge. That's where plane changes happen. And so I added that in just to get that extra degree of separation so it wouldn't be flat up against the reflected light. But it's still building form. Like, no matter what, like, the goal is to always be conscious of that we're creating these transitions, we're building these forms. We're in our practice, we're using all of the elements of value that we possibly can, so that later when we invent things, that we can make decisions about the parts and pieces that we don't feel like we need or that we don't want. So practice these concepts, practice these concepts.